Black Friday is coming, and for the adults in your life who love the coolest toys, well, there's something for them this year too. Bartesian is the premier craft cocktail maker that automatically makes more than 60 seasonal and classic cocktails, each in under 30 seconds at the push of a button. And right now, Bartesian is having a huge site-wide sale. You can get $100 off any cocktail maker or cocktail maker bundle when you spend $400 or more. So, if the cocktail lover in your life has been good this year, or the right kind of bad, get them Bartesian. At the push of a button, make bar-quality cosmopolitans, martinis, Manhattans, and more. All in just 30 seconds. All for $100 off. Amazing toys aren't just for kids. Get $100 off a cocktail maker when you spend $400 through Cyber Monday. Visit bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 294. Today's episode is all about how mindset relates to goal setting.
I mean, none of us want to be uncomfortable just for its own sake. It's not fun. But when there's something at stake, for me, it was, I don't want to live a small life anymore. I want to be seen. I want to feel worthy of being seen. I want to feel like I can trust myself and my own body. And I have something that's worth sharing that I don't want to keep inside anymore. And that gave me the courage to stay in that place of uncertainty. And it was really uncomfortable, but because I was connected to a bigger why, and you know this from our goal achievement work, that's so important with motivation. We have to have an intrinsic reason why it's worth it to be uncomfortable.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Ready to make some positive changes in your life? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to get your weekly dose of Mind Love. That way, you'll always be informed about new episodes. And don't forget, we have more ways to give your mind love at mindlove.com/membership. Have you ever felt like your own thoughts were working against you? That the stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you can achieve, and what's possible might be holding you back from reaching your true potential? If you have, let me tell you that you're actually quite a few steps further than the average person. Most people don't even get this far. They don't realize that it's their own thoughts that are working against them. Instead, they just believe their thoughts to be true. They think, I'm not smart enough. I'm too old or too young. I don't have enough time. I'm not cut out for that. And those beliefs keep them from even trying. The thing is, those beliefs come from somewhere. Someone told you these things about yourself. Or maybe someone modeled those beliefs for you. Or maybe you just never saw anything else modeled, so it doesn't even seem like a possibility. For example, if you were raised in a lower income neighborhood and no one you knew ever moved out and moved on, it would probably be pretty difficult to think that a different life is even possible. Or if your parents were constantly telling you that you're too dumb from a young age, you might not even question it. Once these beliefs are formed, we tend to live our lives confirming them. You get a bad grade on a test, and it's because you're dumb, not because you didn't study. But really, you didn't study because what's the point of studying because you're going to fail anyways because you're too dumb? It's kind of a cycle. Or you didn't feel loved growing up, so you believe that you're hard to love. And this leads to avoiding relationships or sabotaging them when they happen because they're going to leave you anyways when they discover the real you, so why not make it easy for them now? I feel like I was one of the lucky ones. I was surrounded by people who believed in me when I was young. So my foundation of beliefs were fairly empowering. But then I entered the real world, and no one is immune. I had real traumas and some terrible life experiences, and my belief system started to rewrite itself. I doubted myself. I started to think that maybe I wasn't cut out for success. I started to think that maybe I wasn't lovable, and maybe I wasn't worthy. It took years of diving into self-development to come back to my foundation. One of the limiting beliefs that became really pervasive in my early adulthood was that I couldn't follow through on things. No matter how much I felt like I wanted to accomplish something, I would lose motivation halfway through. I remember thinking that I wasted all of my motivation on high school and college. It took me half a decade to realize that I just didn't understand how my brain worked or didn't work. School provided the structure that I needed to get things done. There was a deadline, there were grades, there was friendly competition between peers. Well, for me at least, I loved being at the top of my class. And often, teachers would even break things down so we wouldn't be overwhelmed with one big assignment. Too bad most of the things I learned were kind of useless for my life path, but that's a whole nother episode. It took me until age 32 to finally get fed up and realize that my way wasn't working. I couldn't just rely on some initial motivation. I needed to figure out what was holding me back and how to break through those things. And then I needed to figure out a structure to keep the momentum going. In short, I needed to figure out how to work with my brain instead of against it. And that's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Megan Hyatt Miller. She's a renowned thought leader, coach, and author, and she's dedicated her life to helping others understand use that knowledge to achieve their goals. So 3 key things we will learn are how our brains make narratives, why those narratives can be both helpful and harmful, and her 3-step method for rethinking our thinking when we're stuck in a rut. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Megan Hyatt Miller to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. I'm thrilled to be here.
So I love to ask people what inspired their work, but given that I know who your dad is, I've taken the Best Year Ever course, I'm curious what it was like to grow up in that environment, because that's something my husband and I always talk about, where we're like, man, I'm glad that we're going to be the trendsetters in our family for our children, but what would it have been like if our parents were already in that mindset?
Well, there were so many great things about it. One of the things that I really learned from my dad that I think he really learned from his dad is that if you don't know the answer to something, it's not a problem, because somebody out there somewhere knows what you need to know. You just have to find them. And of course, when I was growing up, that was before the internet, that was before YouTube and social media. So it's only easier now compared with how it was back then. But I think that was an empowering lesson to learn. And my dad did a really great job of, when I was a kid, taking me with him to business meetings. And I can remember the very first meeting I went to, I was 8 years old. Can you believe that? And, he would just let me sit in on those. And I think I learned so much from him just by being together in those professional settings. And that really continued all the way through high school for me. And then, of course, now we're business partners, so we do all kinds of things together. But it was really special.
Including writing a book together. And I have been just flying through your book this week. And I will be honest, I didn't realize there's going to be so much new information to me, given how much I've already studied the mind. And so I was like skimming, and then I was like, I can't skim this. I got to go through. And so one of the first things that caught my eye is that you shared that nearly every challenge that people face is based in the brain and also evident in the stories that we tell about our reality. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, this really has been such a feature of my own life. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, kind of my own story with this and overcoming a pretty major fear I had of public speaking. But, for those of us who would consider ourselves high achievers or, people who are intentional about the way that we live our life, we tend to be very action biased. And in some ways that's not a bad thing. I mean, we all know that taking action is really integral to driving results in our lives. If you want to live a certain way and you want to have a certain kind of life, then you're going to have to take certain kind of actions. But where that kind of breaks down for people, and certainly did for me, is that if you're not getting the results you want, or you have a vision for your life and there's something standing in the way, maybe you're not even sure what it is, but you just can't seem to get unstuck or, kind of go to that next level, it's not usually helpful to focus on actions, because more than likely you're going to try similar things to what you've done before. And in fact, the secret lies in going upstream to our thinking, because our thinking, and even more specifically, the stories we tell ourselves, kind of predispose us to the actions that come to mind, that are available to us, which ultimately are the things that drive the results we're getting in our life. And so if we want better results, we have to go upstream and really develop better thinking. But that's a challenge, because our brain feeds up stories to us that aren't always the most empowering. Sometimes they're fine and they're no problem, and other times they really get in the way. And that's really what we address in the book, Mind Your Mindset.
Yeah, and I was kind of thrown by this because there's so many books that say that action is really the key to overcoming some of these mindset blocks. And so I know that our thinking is one of the most critical parts. That's why I created this podcast. It's all about the power of the mind. But tell us about what that action bias is and why strategy and execution can really only take us so far.
Yeah, well, what we think about what our kind of stories are about how the world works, how we are, how other people are, bias, and not even in a good way or a bad way, because it can go in either direction, but it biases our mind to search for certain kinds of actions and solutions. It's kind of like, everybody's had the experience of you get a new car and all of a sudden you're like, everybody has the same car as I do. And of course, suddenly on that day that you went and picked your car up, the masses didn't also buy the same car. It's that all of a sudden your brain started looking for the thing that it was predisposed to see. And that's kind of how our thoughts work. They pre-tune our brain to look for certain kinds of solutions. So if we focus on strategy and execution, which are vitally important, but if we focus on those first, we're only going to be able to see what our brain allows us to see. And we're not going to have access to new and different ways of thinking. Part of that is because the brain likes to do the same things over and over again. It likes, those ruts, those neural pathways that are cut through our brains and have been well practiced over time. And then you layer on top of it the fact that the thing that our brain is the absolute best at when it comes to storytelling is keeping us safe. It wants to keep us safe. It wants to avoid danger. It wants to avoid humiliation. And so when you add that bias on top of it, it can really stand in the way of finding new ways to get breakthroughs in areas where we have felt stuck in the past, or where we want to go to the next level and our old strategies maybe aren't going to get us there.
One of the things that really caught my attention that I really haven't heard in this way before is that, because I know that our past stories affect what we think we're capable of. It affects our reality. It affects how we view the world, other people, what we think is possible. But what I didn't quite realize is that our goals are also the other side of that. And so we're constantly filtering things through our past actions, our past experiences, and also our goals. And you gave this really good example of a doctor and this guy that was trying to climb. Can you tell that story? Because I thought that was incredible.
Yes. Yeah. So this is an amazing story. This is worth looking up and reading the whole thing. But there was a mountain climber named Hugh Hare, and he, when he was in his late teens or early 20s, he was climbing a mountain and got really bad frostbite. And he actually had to have his legs amputated, which is like obviously the end of the story for a mountain climber. I mean, how is a guy with no legs going to climb a mountain, right? And that's what his doctors told him. They said, hey, we're going to have to tell you some hard news. You're not going to be able to climb mountains anymore. We're sure you'll do great things in your life, but your athletic career in this regard is over. And he said, not so fast. I actually don't need legs to climb a mountain. I just need a way to get up the mountain, to scale the mountain, and to hang on. And I'm sure his doctors were like, buddy, you are crazy. But in fact, he went on to develop these amazing prosthetic legs that allowed him to climb, get this, faster than he'd ever climbed before. So, I mean, he's breaking his own records with these new legs that he's created. And in fact, he has become a professor at MIT. He holds a whole bunch of patents for all kinds of prosthetic limbs that have enabled all kinds of people with similar challenges to overcome their own limitations. But the real difference maker in Hugh Hare's story is that he told himself a different story than his doctors were telling him. I mean, his doctors were saying, hey, this is it. It's over. Glad you had a good run, but we're done. And I think that's the big idea of this book, is that all of us inside our heads, we have this kind of character called the narrator. That's what we call it in the book, which is really just our brain. And the narrator doesn't distinguish between what happens to us. So like in the example of Hugh Hare, getting frostbite and having to have your legs amputated, those were the facts and what happened. And the story that we tell ourselves about the facts. So his doctor said, you'll never be able to climb a mountain again. Well, that's a story. That's not necessarily a factual accounting of what happened. And so this narrator really can take on a life of its own. And most of us aren't even aware that it's talking to us kind of in the background. We assume that it's just us and it's the facts of the situation. But in reality, if Hugh Hare had not had the story of, actually, I don't need legs, I just need a way to climb up this mountain, he would never have been able to discover the innovations that he came up with for these prosthetics legs that have enabled him to do all the mountain climbing he's done since then.
I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level, and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com.
It just reminds me of the Henry Ford quote about
Yeah.
if you would have asked the people what they want, they would have asked for a faster horse. And
Right.
rather than considering there might be this whole other pathway that you're not thinking about.
Yep.
But if we have these stories that we've experienced, these our own experiences that have created limiting beliefs, and then on the other side, we have these big goals. What I find that what gets in my way sometimes is it's just like you said, I won't even think of a big goal because my mind is already kind of blocking it off. Like that might not be possible. I don't want to let myself down, or, I don't want to be embarrassed or whatever it is.
Right.
And so how do we get to the point of even being able to create bigger goals so that it can kind of counteract some of our past experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that experience is so common. I've faced it many, many, many times myself. Many of our clients have. We just worked with so many people in that exact situation. So completely normal. What I have found is that the first step, and we actually go through 3 steps in the book to begin to tell yourself better stories so you can get better results in your life, is to identify the stories you're telling, identify this narrator, because like I said, it kind of operates in the subconscious and most of us aren't even aware that it's happening. And so if you can just bring those stories to your awareness, and what we say in the book is the best access to these stories is the language you use. So usually those stories sound something like, well, he would never fill in the blank, or I could never do that, or I always do this. That's kind of what these stories sound like. They sound very certain. It's amazing to me actually, because they're very subjective, but they sound so true and so certain. And if we can start by just identifying those stories, then we can move to the next step, which is to interrogate those stories. And, you think about like those old crime movies with the light bulb, the single light bulb hanging in the dark room over the table, right? It's like we need to actually do that with our stories. And before we can even interrogate, though, we do want to be very kind to ourselves and very self-compassionate as we're identifying these stories, because your brain's really just trying to help you. It's not anything you did wrong. You're not like just a negative person or something like that. It's just always going to be that self-protective kind of story that's going to come up first, because that's how you're wired. And so when you begin interrogating, you're not doing it to judge yourself. You're really just seeing if you can pull apart the facts, the things that would be in like a boring police report. The guy crossed the street at 6:59 p.m. Then he walked across, to the burger place or whatever. It's always going to be boring from the story. And if you can begin interrogating that, pulling them apart, then you can ask questions like, has that ever been not true? When I say things like he's always, or I never, that kind of thing, what else might be true? Do other people think this, or do they have a different interpretation? And so you can start to just sort of, shake the edges of these things loose so that you can then ultimately get to the third step, which is to imagine a better story. And that's really exciting, because what I love about this book, Mind Your Mindset, and the research that we did and our own work in this process is to realize we have a lot more agency than most of us have thought. Most of us, I know I felt like this before, just kind of feel like the victim of what's happened to you in your life. And all of us have had hard things, some more traumatic than others. And the reality is that is all true. Everybody has had difficult things and some really, really difficult things. And we don't have to stay with the stories that those experiences left us with. We can actually intentionally intervene, interrogate those stories, and imagine something better. And ultimately, that can become what feels truest to us and ultimately guides our actions and the results that we accomplish as a result.
I'm reminded of a quote in your book that I had to write down just because I've always prided myself on having an open mind. But I've noticed the more that I've grown and the more that I actually really dive into topics, that what ends up happening for me is I keep an open mind with a lot of things until I get to something where I'm like, wow, that just switched my mindset completely, which I'm used to doing. There's so many things that I started on one side and now I'm on the complete other.
Sure.
But then once I'm on that other side, I start to get closed-minded because I'm like, I've already been on this side.
Sure.
Like now
Yeah, right.
I'm right. And there's no one that's convincing me that I'm not. But what we refer to as a closed mind is nothing more than the brain's standard method of operation, which prefers familiar, well-established neural pathways. And I was like, well-established, that's the thing. I'm really good at being open-minded on the things that I haven't really gone deep on. But once I start going deep, and who knows really if I even went down the right path, but I've spent so much time in that then all of a sudden my hard candy shell starts to kind of close around my mind. And I'm like, I'm not going back to that other side. So that just was really helpful. But I want to kind of dive in deeper on the identifying the story that we're telling ourselves. You mentioned separating fact from opinion, but I know that there's two other things that really kind of show themselves when we are forming our opinions and believing them to be fact, and that's our emotions. And then also, I know we tend to connect to metaphors a lot because that's just the way we understand our world. So what do we do with those two things, and how do we kind of dissolve those to get to the root of what we're thinking about?
I think that's such a good point, because you're right. Some of the most difficult stories in terms of how they've negatively impacted our life are cemented in moments with a lot of emotion, usually negative emotion. Some of the best stories are on the other side. So I think about in my own story, which I tell in Mind Your Mindset, about my fear of public speaking, which really began when I was in high school. I had a very close friend who was delivering a presentation in front of the class, and she had an anxiety attack and literally ran out of the classroom, bawling her eyes out. I found her in the bathroom, just kind of in the fetal position. And I'm very empathetic by nature. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, speaking is so dangerous. I never want to be humiliated like that and lose control of my body. And I didn't realize that. I wasn't conscious until many years later that moment had catalyzed this fear for me. But the fear just grew and grew and grew over the years. And to the point where, like if I was in a book club and how you go around and everybody reads, you read this chapter and I'll read, whatever. I couldn't even do that in front of 6 or 8 people. Literally every time I opened my mouth, my voice would shake and I would feel like I was losing control of my body. And fast forward in my professional career, I avoided all kinds of opportunities that might involve speaking. I mean, I avoided it like the plague, and nobody knew. It was really my secret shame, except for my husband. Nobody was aware until finally, fast forward about 6 years ago, my team came to me and said, hey, we want to do a big event and we want you to keynote, which was totally a natural thing for them to ask me to do given my role. And they said, this will be about 800 people and we think it's going to be great. And of course, I didn't hear anything after 800 people. I'm just like, oh my gosh, first keynote, 800 people is my literal worst nightmare. And I ended up in my own version of my friend's story at a American Airlines gate in Chicago, getting ready to leave to come home from a business trip, crying, talking to a friend who was a speech coach and saying, I have to finally face this fear because my life is getting smaller and smaller and I'm not willing to pay that price anymore. And so I really began that process of getting clear about what stories that I'd been telling all these years, that began in my teens, and then interrogating them. And, it's funny. I was talking to somebody earlier today and I was saying, I had evidence in my own experience of times that I had spoken, including in high school, like at my graduation, when I had given a speech and not lost control of my body and I wasn't humiliated and it went great. But the story was so strong that my brain just kind of filtered that out. It couldn't integrate that. And so it was just basically scanning for things that would help to confirm the story that I already had. And so I went through a very disciplined process of interrogating that story. And then ultimately, I wrote out about a page and a half of what I wanted to experience, the new story, when I stepped on that stage in front of 800 people, because I was determined that come hell or high water, I was going to give that speech and survive it, And it was amazing. It was a very difficult, honestly, brutal 6 weeks of preparation for that, including panic attacks and, anxiety doctors and speech coaches and all kinds of stuff. But I made it. I got up there. It was fantastic. I finally looked that story in the eye and I, kind of dethroned it, so to speak, once and for all. And now on the other side of that, all these years later, I do tons of speaking every week, all week, in some form or fashion. And it's amazing because I would have never thought that was possible because of the story I was telling myself.
It's amazing how much stronger the negative stories are, even if you
Yeah,
have 100 times the evidence for a different story. I am
absolutely.
reminded of my first two bigger professional jobs. The very first one was an enrollment counselor at the University of Phoenix, which was a tumultuous experience in itself, but I did really well in sales. But then the company ended up kind of going under after I left. But
Mm,
I just remember kind of looking back and not feeling good about the work that I did there because I didn't necessarily
mm,
feel good about their business model. And then I ended up
right.
working with a startup that was doing really amazing in the beginning, but because of just changes that were out of our control with the app store model, blah, 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 that company ended up going
Mm,
under. And then the next company that popped up that I was hired with the same CEO, he was having a hard time getting it off the ground. And so
mm,
when I finally decided to start my own business, I didn't realize how tied I was to this idea that the businesses that I was involved in don't succeed. And so I had a really difficult time
yeah.
feeling
Wow.
successful and like tying my own. I was like, am I just bringing
Hmm.
companies down? Like, not like I could bring down the University of Phoenix, but
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it was when I started actually working with limiting beliefs and uncovering those stories. And it took a lot of work to even see that that was one. I had no idea that was affecting me. And so I
Hmm.
love when you kind of ask yourself, like, well, what other evidence do I have for my success? Because that was the one that got me with that,
Hmm.
where I was like, there's all these things. It doesn't have to be a business, but there's been a lot of things that I've been involved in that have been successful. And there's been a lot of ways that I've proved to myself that I can follow through and all of these things that I needed to see in myself. What are some other questions that can help us assess the logic of our own stories?
Yeah, one of the things that you can do if you have people in your life who you trust, who you really feel like are for you, and not everybody does, and I recognize that, but if you do, sometimes other people can see things that are not apparent to us. And this is where, this could be a spouse, a significant other, a close friend, a coworker. It could also be a coach. It could be a therapist. In fact, really good therapy is exactly this, right? This is this process of interrogating these stories that are holding us back. And sometimes they can see things that you can't see. And so I think you could ask somebody, okay, in this example of, always being behind business failures in one way or another, do you think of anything that comes to mind in my professional career, as long as you've known me, that would be counter to that? And my guess is that people in your life would have said, "Oh yeah, do you remember that one time you got that award for that thing? Or do you remember that time you did that presentation and it absolutely saved whatever?" And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that." And so I think one of the best strategies here, besides doing your own interrogation, is bringing somebody else into the conversation because they don't feel the emotional connection and the power of that original story in the way that you do. So they're going to feel freer to interrogate and ask questions or say, "Really? Because I don't think that's how people see you." Or, "Really? Because in my experience, most people are actually pretty good-hearted and generous. I think you've just met a few people that were, really nefarious or something like that." And that can be so, so helpful.
I know for me, when I am really attached to a story, I feel compelled to back that up. It's not as easy for me to be like,
Yes.
you know what, let me challenge this and see if I can just open my mindset because I've been believing
Hmm.
this thing for so long. And I know that there are
Yeah.
other
And your
reasons.
brain likes certainty.
Yes, and there are other reasons why our narrator gets things wrong. One of them is like I was just talking about, it feels really good to be right. Why is that? Why does it
Mm.
feel good to be right even when we know there could be a doubt that we're not right?
You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about Select Quote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million, no medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove.
Why is that? Why does it feel good to be right, even when we know there could be a doubt that we're not right?
I feel like this is the $1 million question. And if we solve this, we will make our society a whole lot better because we got a lot of people who really want to be right all the time, even when they're not, on every side of everything. I think that it goes back to what we were just saying. Our brains really love certainty. They do not like uncertainty. They do not like chaos. They like predictability because if they can predict, and this is one of the main functions of the brain is predicting based on past experiences and assumptions. If they can predict the future, then they can keep us safe. And so that's the whole goal and outcome that the brain is concerned with. And so you being right is safer than, even though we know from a more evolved perspective, that's not actually true, but our brain's a little behind, in some ways. And it thinks that if we can be certain and if it can know, then that is much less dangerous than the liminal space of not knowing. And I think that can be really unsettling. And, this is something, frankly, I've had to work on. My husband, Joel, is awesome at this. He's a real intellectual and he reads a ton and he's always reading really diverse sources and he doesn't mind questioning his assumptions. And I remember when we first got married 14 years ago, that was kind of threatening to me. I didn't like arguing. I didn't like debating. I didn't like, and he loves all that kind of stuff, and I learned from him that if you can just suspend your disbelief for a moment, and you just sort of have to learn how to tolerate the discomfort of this because it is uncomfortable, then you can open yourself up to new possibilities. And that's really exciting. I mean, that's how we all grow, but we have to get out of our comfort zone. And I think when we realize our brain just wants to be comfortable and it wants to be safe, and so we're just going to have to build our tolerance for some of that discomfort, I think that's how we do it.
Another thing that our brains do is that they're naturally programmed to find the why, which can be really good in some situations, but
yes,
then it's sort of filling in blanks that it doesn't have the answers to and then convinces itself that it has all the answers to. So how is that affecting us?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we are meaning makers. That is one of the real distinctives of humans, is that we make meaning. The problem is we don't always have all the pieces to make meaning that is either helpful or very accurate. Very often, sometimes in situations where we feel the most compelled to make meaning, we have the least amount of information. And so we're just kind of trying to stitch together something that makes sense because it's too unsettling to not have any kind of schematic for an experience or a life. It's part of how we process things. And that can be a real problem for us because a lot of times we're wrong. It's sort of like I'm here at my office today and I went over earlier and got some coffee. And let's say that somebody who works for me came in and I was busy, thinking about this interview, and I didn't look them in the eye and say, good afternoon, or, how's your day going, or something like that. Well, they could walk off and say, oh, Megan didn't say anything to me. I bet she's mad at me. I bet I'm about to get fired. And in reality, I'm not thinking about them at all. I'm thinking about this interview I'm about to have and, what we're going to talk about. And I'm totally distracted with something else. But this kind of stuff happens all the time. And the problem is, like we talked about at the beginning, our thinking informs our actions and our actions inform our results. So if the person I didn't say hello to at the kitchen earlier today thinks that they're going to get fired and they start acting out of that place, and maybe they start looking for another job, job and they start, telling their coworkers they think they're going to get fired, and maybe they kind of mentally check out because they think that's imminent, they might end up getting fired because they started acting like a person who was about to get fired. In reality, that wasn't even on the table at all. And so I think that's how we get ourselves in trouble, is that those assumptions that come from the stories drive our actions, and our actions deliver results. And sometimes those are not the ones we want.
I have a history with this, as all of us do. But one of the things that I've become aware of in the last few years that I wouldn't have known about myself 5 to 10 years ago is I have a tendency, and I know a lot of people do, when I'll leave an event or leave hanging out with a friend, all of a sudden I'll start to overthink everything. I could have felt amazing the entire conversation. I could have made a bunch of friends, and then I leave and I'm like, was I too intense right there? I tend to be too intense. I wonder what they think of me, like blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden I'm second guessing my whole personality. And I tie it back to
your whole life.
And when I was a child, and I don't even know if this is the right or wrong thing to do as a parent. It seems kind, but I don't know. I just remember a lot of times on drives home, that's when my mom would kind of bring up the things that bugged her about what I did as a kid, like talking back or whatever. And so I was always kind of bracing myself for the car ride home of like, okay, what'd I do wrong? And so now whenever I'm in a car ride home all by myself, I'm like, okay, what did I do wrong there? Let's unpack this, Melissa. So tying those together was both freeing and also kind of sad. I'm like, man, this is deeply rooted. This isn't just like this one-off thing. And so now I have to remind myself, like I have to give myself a pep talk on any car ride home where I'm like, let's list all the things you did well. I'm like trying to reverse it so that maybe I get excited for that instead of my brain defaulting to all of the things that I possibly did wrong.
That's a great strategy. I think that's so normal. I have that too. My husband calls that the doom loop.
One of the things that is hard for me as somebody who has a mindfulness podcast, I go deep into the spiritual, is when I was first diving into this side of my beliefs, there's such an emphasis placed on intuition and how, here, you might be placed with these facts, but how do you feel? Where's your intuition steering you? But the truth is that intuition can be risky. Mm-hmm. When is intuition a good thing to lean on? And when is it something that we should also be challenging? Or is it kind of a combination of the two?
I think it's a combination of the two. I would consider myself highly intuitive. And I would also say that that's one of the greatest strengths that I bring to my personal and professional life. I jokingly say, like, I ignore that at my own peril. And when I do, I always regret it. However, sometimes it is wrong. And sometimes it can be wrong because of our past experiences. Again, our brain wants to keep us safe. And so if it thinks that something is threatening some way, for example, this is how prejudice can often work, or bias, because we've been conditioned socially to have certain fears or assumptions about different people groups that our brain in its kind of primitive form reads as being dangerous. And so what can feel like intuition or like a, kind of knee-jerk reaction, that person's dangerous, or I don't like them, or it's not a good idea to hire that person, can be absolutely a function of these past experiences in our brain, again, not in its fully evolved state, trying to keep us safe, but not really being helpful. And so that's where we have to become aware of the stories. What we talk about in the book is this idea of intuition is a really great thing, but it needs to be also matched and kind of balanced with our reason. And so that, and our reason, like our executive functioning, can help us to really identify the stories that are behind that intuition. As long as they're helping you, it's great. As long as it really is keeping you safe in a way that's not undermining other things in your life. And for me, that's true most of the time, but sometimes it's not true. And that's where having that conscious awareness of the stories I'm telling myself, and then the discipline around interrogating them, helps me to know, okay, is this really intuition, or is this kind of a fear-based or bias-based approach that feels true, but it's not true? Because sometimes our feelings aren't true, or our feelings are misguided in some way, which is not to say we should totally discount them. We shouldn't. I mean, they're really valuable information, but we just kind of need a check and balance there, I think, to make sure we don't get ourselves in trouble.
One of the things that I feel highly intuitive about because of my past experience, so it's kind of a combo, is I was in a really horrible relationship with somebody who manipulated and gaslit me. And so now there's been a lot of situations in my adulthood where I am on that immediately, whereas everyone else is still like revering this person. And I'm like, nope, something's sketch. And people are like, why are you second guessing this guy? Blah, blah, blah. And turns out every single time so far, it's turned out that has been the correct case. But now I'm in this position where I'm so rarely in a situation like that. And I've found myself that the multiple people that I've been in this position with have very similar personality types. And it also tends to be the personality type of highly successful people. And so I've found now I'm still around people like that, and my spidey senses will be going off. But I'm like, okay, no, I'm connecting the wrong things. I'm not connecting their actions. I'm now also linking this personality trait. Right. And so that's the thing I have to challenge. And I'm grateful that I've done enough work to at least bring that amount of awareness, because it's so easy to make these connections where I'm like, well, now I'm good at this. I'm never wrong about this one.
Right. and your brain just loves repeating a pattern. I mean, it's like, yeah, we got this. We got that neural pathway down and we're good at it. Let's go.
Exactly. And so I actually journaled one day. I'm like, no, what are the things that really spike my senses about this? And it's about certain way. Yes, they have that similar personality type, but that's not the thing. It's when they approach me with this, or they cut me off with this, or they are rejecting my reality with this. Those are the things. And just because so far I've only encountered it in this personality type, or maybe it's even more common in that personality type, doesn't mean that every single person who has that personality type is going to do the same thing to me.
Right. Well, it's the difference between correlation and causation, right? Yeah. Just because someone is successful doesn't mean that they're also going to be manipulative and gaslight you. And part of that interrogation process, you could ask yourself, are 3 people really a big enough sample size to draw a conclusion about everybody who shares these personality traits? And I mean, I think the obvious answer would be probably not. But that's why if you don't go through the process of being clear that that's a story you're telling yourself, and that it has helpful parts and maybe unhelpful parts, then you never get to the interrogation part, and you never get to maybe a more nuanced version of that story that helps you take advantage of the wisdom of your intuition, which clearly is present in this situation, but avoid some of those kind of overgeneralizations and pitfalls that could really get in the way of maybe you finding someone fantastic.
And isn't it ironic that if somebody was telling me something that I had not experienced, and they're like, it's based on this study, I am the kind of person, especially after the last couple of years, where I'm like, let me see the original study. I want to see what data you're drawing from. And so I'll go and I'm like, this sample size was only 300 people? Ridiculous. Right. Meanwhile, my sample size for my own studies is 2. Maybe 3. And I'm like, nope. What are the chances that the only 2 people like this would be this? That means it's 100%. And so I just jumped to this conclusion.
Yes.
But you're right. It feels good to be right, and it feels good to have some sort of certainty. Like I have some rule for this, so I feel safe going into it.
Right.
But one of the things that you teach is about trading certainty for results. How can that benefit us? One of the things that you teach is about trading certainty for results. How can that benefit us?
Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing in a way, because, we've all heard that saying, like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And it's a little bit like that with our thinking. Do you want to be certain or do you want to get what you want ultimately? Because I have experienced many things where I thought, gosh, I have tried everything possible to get a breakthrough here. And no matter what I do, it's just not possible for me. In my speaking example, I guess I must just not be a speaker. I'm just one of those people that's just super anxious about speaking, and it's just not in the cards for me. That'd be another great story. It's not in the cards for me, and in reality, I just hadn't tried some of the things that I learned how to do with the coaches that I worked with. And I didn't have the tools that I needed. And I had this really disempowering story. And so I think that is what you have to just think through, are you willing to let go of some certainty and try some different things so that you can really get what you want? Are you really willing to write that check for certainty and safety over the life that you want? Because for most of us, the answer, if we're really thinking about it, is no. No, I'm not. I really want this kind of relationship or this in my career or, this spiritually or whatever, but that's going to mean some risk taking and being willing to step out of our comfort zones and our kind of zone of certainty into a place of uncertainty so that ultimately we can have what we really, really want, which is more like fulfillment than certainty.
A quote that really got me from your book was, "The greater our capacity for uncertainty, the more creative we can be about the challenges we face." And so when you really think about that, it's like, yeah, creativity isn't really certainty whatsoever. The most creative people are thinking innovatively. They're thinking about something completely different, something that's never been done before. And so to get into that mindset can be really helpful. But I know that you have 3 steps for embracing uncertainty. What are some of those steps? Because I know uncertainty is just hard. Like the amount of times I've heard people say, I don't like change, or I don't like the unfamiliar. And it's almost like they embrace that more. And so I can see there's so many benefits to figuring out how to open our arms to the other side of that. What are some of those steps for helping ourselves embrace uncertainty?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is to realize that we're safe. I think, I have a toddler. So I have 5 kids. My youngest is 3. My oldest is 21. And a lot of times with my 3-year-old, she has gone through so many irrational fears. And this is so easy to see in little kids, like currently she's afraid of mushrooms. I don't know. She saw it in a show or something. She thinks these mushrooms are going to attack her. I don't even know if she's ever seen a mushroom in real life. But, I have to talk to her and calm her brain down, that limbic part of her brain, and just say, you know what, Naomi, you're safe. Mushrooms aren't real. You're really safe. And so I think that is a big part of it, is just kind of talking to ourselves lovingly and kindly about the fears that we have around uncertainty. And then even just calling it what it is. You know what? This is just uncertainty. It's okay. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. Of course, my brain doesn't like it. There's nothing wrong with me. This is just normal. This is what everybody experiences. And then a big part of my own story, my own success, and this has been true in so many situations, and, maybe none more dramatically than this experience of overcoming the fear of speaking, was to get really connected to why you're willing to be uncomfortable. Like if you don't have anything at stake, if it doesn't mean a lot to you, then, none of us want to be uncomfortable just for its own sake. It's not fun. But when there's something at stake, for me, it was, I don't want to live a small life anymore. I want to be seen. I want to feel worthy of being seen. I want to feel like I can trust myself and my own body. And I have something that's worth sharing that I don't want to keep inside anymore. And that gave me the courage to stay in that place of uncertainty. And it was really uncomfortable, but because I was connected to a bigger why, and this from our goal achievement work, that's so important with motivation. We have to have an intrinsic reason why it's worth it to be uncomfortable.
My reason is my toddler, because I know that, just as I mentioned earlier, the very first question I asked you, what was it like to grow up with a dad like that? Yeah. I want to be the mom like that, Yeah. I want to be the one that shows him, I want his first basis of understanding, his first experiences to be a jumping off point, so that then when he's creating his goals, he knows what's possible. And so that's a huge part of my why. And I'll be honest, I'm in this weird period where when I have a toddler, and I'm also a month away from giving birth to my second. So I went through this limbo period right after I had my first, where it was really hard to set goals for after pregnancy, because what's it going to be like being a mom? And I didn't even know if all of my priorities would change, so that am I still going to want this, or am I going to be no, I need 100% time with my toddler? I've learned about myself, I'm much better if I also have my side thing or my full-time thing, whatever it is. I need both sides.
I totally agree.
And then it's a lot easier to be present with my toddler.
Yes.
And so now I know that about myself. And so it's a little bit different going into this second baby. Yeah, there's still a lot of unknowns. I have no idea what it's going to be like to have two, how I'm going to manage my time. But I trust more that I'm going to want the same things. And so having that, though, I am such a different person right now in how I'm setting my goals and approaching my business than I was 2 years ago when I was having my last baby. And so that in itself is a kind of certainty that I'm able to cling to that helps all of the uncertainty a little bit more. It's like, no, you know what? You still have this. And so what I've been practicing doing is when I get caught up in the unknowns, which happens a couple times a day, I stop and I'm like, but what do I know? And it's kind of like the same thing of, oh God, there's all this that's out of my control, but what is in my control? And so it's a slightly different variation of that question, but I've found it to be really healing. And I'm also very thankful for the work that I've done earlier on in life I learned how to talk to my inner child before I learned how to talk to a child, you know? And so even having my toddler there, I find myself approaching challenges with him or his fits or whatever in a completely different way because, and normally it's the opposite for people. It's like, how would I talk to my kid? I'm like, how have I learned to talk to my inner child? Now let me talk to him. And
I love that.
One of the big things for both of us, my little me and his little me, is you framed it perfectly when you said you are safe. It's framing things in the positive perspective rather than tackling the negative. So instead of saying like, there's no reason to be afraid, there's no reason for this, because then they're just like, well, then why do I feel this? You know, it's like,
or let me tell you all the reasons.
Yeah. It's like your feelings are valid and you're safe. Like feel into that word. And so even just that's been really helpful. So how can we train our narrator to help us achieve our goals rather than hinder them?
Well, I think part of it is realizing that there's the default narrator and its stories in your head, and there's nothing you can do about the fact that your brain just offers up these stories kind of, automatically. So I think that helps all by itself to just say, oh, the pressure's off. If you've ever done any mindfulness work, and I know you have and your listeners have, the goal is not to not have thoughts in your head. I mean, if you try to make yourself not think something, the surest way to be really unsettled in any kind of mindfulness work is to try to like take control of your thoughts, like not have the negative thoughts. And I learned this when I was first introduced to mindfulness. You just kind of like watch them and you don't get attached to them and you just sort of let them go like a ticker tape across your consciousness. And I think that's what we learn to do with our narrator. We don't get all excited about it. We just sort of say, oh yeah, that's that thing. It does, oh, look at that. There's a thought coming up. And then we start to go through that process of interrogating and imagining. And I think what happens over time when anything that we repeat like this becomes habitual, we recognize the story that pops up, that identify step, and then we just start interrogating it. And what I have found over the years, and I found with my clients, is that over time, you get really good at interrogating. You stop believing the first thing you think as a default because you know that that's probably not true or not helpful. And you just go through this automatic, interrogation process. And then you begin to think, okay, what could I think that would actually serve me here? And I think the more you do that, then your narrator really becomes your ally. And that's when it's awesome because first of all, sometimes it really is trying to keep you safe. And that is what you need in the way that it presents itself to you. Like we were talking about with intuition earlier. And that's a great thing, but also it can be trained like a puppy with repetition to start going through these other steps as well, in addition to its kind of automatic response. And that's when you start to see the new neural pathways cut. And this just gets easier and easier and easier. And those first thoughts that come up become less and less powerful over time.
Yeah, I have found that acceptance that it's supposed to be doing that. Like that's one of my mantras. Like, thank you, brain, for trying to keep me safe, but I don't need you right now. Yeah, it's exactly how I talk to my mom. Yeah. I'm like, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but let go of the leash. I'm 37.
Yeah, I got it.
But it reminds me too of something my husband and I were just talking about the other day is having a toddler. gosh, so many learning experiences. And
So
I'm
many.
only 2 years into this, so
Yep.
it still feels new. Every stage is such a new thing
Yes.
that I don't know. I think you have to get out of parenthood before you're like, okay, now I know all the stages. But
Totally.
we were just recently talking about how, like, he's just about 2 right now, and he's having more fits about things when he doesn't get his way. And if I'm not trying to do something else, it doesn't bother me that much. Like, if I
Yeah.
don't have this other idea in mind,
Yep.
if I do, like, one example, it seems like whenever my husband and I are having a conversation we're both really passionate about and we want to share this information so bad, for some reason he decides he wants to throw a fit about absolutely nothing. And so then all of a sudden he's screaming and we're like, okay, what do you need, Bravery? Like, stop.
Yes.
and then but if we're just hanging out and it's like, well, this is just my time with him, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
poor baby, what's wrong? Like, how
Yes,
can I
it's
help
so
you
true.
through this? And I think the same thing happens with my mind, where I have an expectation that I'm just going to get through this rather than holding
Yeah.
myself back. Then I'm like, God, like, what is this? Like, I just feel like horrible. Nothing's going to go right. Versus like just accepting this is what you do. You're my toddler brain or whatever it is.
Yep.
You're trying to keep me safe. You need attention, whatever it is. And just like kind of easing into acceptance and then saying, okay, now what was I doing? It doesn't even really need to do anything different. It's just my approach to it is a little bit
Right.
different. And it makes it easier to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think when we fight it, it just gets bigger, and it's kind of like our narrator starts to argue with us, like, let me tell you why I'm right, and if you can just accept it at the beginning with kind of love, really, and gratitude, like you were saying, thank you, I know you're trying to keep me safe. And then you can move on from there. That sets the stage for a really productive conversation with yourself. But if you feel like this is not supposed to be happening, I'm resisting this, I'm not supposed to be, frankly, human, I'm just supposed to be always at my peak, always at my best, nothing should be this hard, then that's where we really get ourselves into trouble. So like so many things in life, I think this starts with kindness and self-compassion. And that's really the jumping off point for ultimately writing better stories that get us where we want to go.
One of the other keys to this whole conversation that I think is so important to understand about how our brains work is that a lot of this is we're like talking about how we can consciously redirect, open our mindsets, but there's so much that's going on subconsciously in our minds as well. And we like to have that control. We like to be like, well, I can just do this thing and think this way or challenge myself in this way, and it'll start to rewire this. But there's also a really big benefit to not doing anything. One of the quotes in your book was, not working is still working, because our subconscious minds are able to reorganize those thoughts if we give them space. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it just kind of goes to that action bias all over again. I mean, at least in the Western world, our default is action, fix it, and sometimes that's not necessary. Like I tell a story in the book about my own kids. Like I said, I have 5 kids. My younger 3 children are adopted. The middle 2 are from Uganda, and they were adopted at ages 3 and 14 months. And no children who are adopted have escaped massive trauma. I mean, it's not a normal thing that you're not able to stay with your biological parents. Something catastrophic has had to happen for that to be necessary. I always like to say adoption is like plan Z, it's the last resort. And, one of the things that I've learned about trauma is that you have to integrate traumatic experiences. And that doesn't necessarily happen at a conscious level. It takes time. It takes getting into the body. A lot of those traumatic experiences are held in the body. And there are so many beautiful modalities that can help to process trauma through the body and to really bring the body back together with the mind. And I think that's a good example of not doing, that there are things, if we try to sometimes, and this is maybe just particular to trauma work, and I'm not a therapist, so I'm not standing in that professional space, but just as someone who has walked with my children through this, a lot of times the path of brute force is the worst possible way, because the body and the mind heal kind of at their own speed. It's not the speed that our conscious mind works at, and I think there's a lot of patience that is needed for that, and a lot of kindness and space, and that can be really beneficial.
Yeah, you told a really intriguing story in the very beginning of your book about dealing with this stuff and going to a workshop or a convention where you ended up learning everything that you wanted to do ended up being wrong, and you were kind of opened your mind to all of these other ways. What are some examples of because I know a lot of my audience has gone through their own trauma and they have that work to do. What are some of the examples that don't work? You said brute force, but how so versus what does?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've learned with my kids and their journey is that safety is the core question for people who've experienced trauma. But I actually think it's the core question for all of us. It's just our primitive brain. Are we safe? Am I safe with this person? Am I safe in this space? Am I going to be safe if that thing happens? I wasn't safe back then. What do I do with that? I mean, it's a lot to process through. And so I think setting up experiences that feel safe versus threatening is so important. I know for my own kids, part of what has been discovered in the work around attachment, which is what, all the work around early development is called attaching to your caregiver, your primary caregiver. When that has been severed unnaturally, as it has in adoption, usually there's all kinds of other stuff that goes along with that. The work of the new parent, the adoptive parent, is to create felt safety. And that looks like coming alongside of the child and helping the child do things that maybe seems like not quite age appropriate, And if you think about that as an adult, that would look like things like, okay, well, I probably could do that myself, or I could muscle through this, but I'm going to choose to slow down here. I'm going to choose to take a nap. I'm going to choose to go on a walk. I'm going to choose to take a bath and be kind to myself instead of pushing through and always doing the hardest thing. Like I'm one of those people that I have a lot of capacity for doing hard things. I've been through a lot of hard stuff. And I just kind of default to, yeah, I can do that. It's hard. Sure. I'll just double down, And sometimes I need to back up and rest instead of doing the hard thing. And I also need to ask for help and support. We've had lots of support for our kids, which has been helpful. But I think this is where outside resources can be so helpful, whether that's a therapist or a coach of some kind, or maybe just a mentor or family or friends, if that's relevant for you. But sometimes we think about brute force and we think about doing things, on our own when we really don't have to. And we talked earlier about how beneficial that can be in our stories, to have other people's perspectives. And that can be true in all kinds of areas.
When I got with my husband, I had never felt safe, I think, with a partner, honestly. Like, I didn't have all terrible partners, and so there's different variations of the word safe. Sure. It's not like I felt unsafe with some, but I didn't necessarily feel like I could completely be myself, for example, as some of the less extreme ways of feeling unsafe. And then I had relationships where I actually felt unsafe. But
right.
One of the things that I learned about myself is because I kind of grew up with two dads, but also kind of none. Like my parents were separated very young. I recently posted about this on Instagram where I was blessed to have two loving father figures, but my dad, I'd see him for trips, basically. It wasn't even really every other weekend. And so it wasn't enough to cultivate that closeness. And then my stepdad, probably for the best, would kind of pass off big decisions to my mom. Like, have your mom do this, which I probably would have rebelled against him if he didn't do that. But I remember feeling envy with my friends that had dads that one friend called herself a daddy's girl. And I remember like my heart hurting when she said that.
Wow.
And I remember being even younger and my neighbor climbing onto her dad's lap and actually sitting there thinking, I wonder what it would feel like to feel so close to a man that I felt compelled to climb onto his lap, because I just never had that. And so this is almost ridiculous. But when I ended up with my husband, there were a lot of parts of my inner child. Like I've never acted that much that childlike with somebody, and I would just get in these moods where it was almost like role playing, I guess. Yeah. Where I just like be this like cuddly little thing and just go into this small child's like persona. Yeah. And he sort of embraced it. And I
Wow.
don't, it hasn't really happened since we've had kids. And so it's funny sharing something like that because I don't know, maybe it embarrasses some people. But for me, I found being able to be that small version of me really healing. Like it was like
Hmm.
this, and I could tell I'm also very pregnant right now, but I'm like tearing up thinking about it. Like some of
Oh,
these early things of just like nuzzling in
yeah.
and just being like, I had this thing where I'd be like, I
Yeah.
feel tiny today, you know, and so he'd just know to like nurture
Oh,
me a little bit more.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's interesting. It took a lot of self-awareness to even realize that about myself. And
Hmm.
so we all have all of these layers. It doesn't necessarily need to be a trauma. Like I didn't
Yep.
consider my parents' divorce a trauma. It's all I ever knew. They were divorced so
Yeah.
young, you know.
Right.
But you develop these mindsets about things because of what you witness and because of what you
Hmm.
wish you had and the things that
Hmm.
kind of affect you. And so it does take a lot of self-awareness to even identify those stories like we talked
Yes.
about and then start to challenge them and then start to figure out our own little paths that might
Hmm.
heal that, you know,
Yeah.
and to be able to feel comfortable enough to play, whether it's with
Hmm.
our new ideas, a new type of mindset,
Yep.
or a new way of being, just to sort of feel differently and see what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so what I kind of want to leave people with, because I found this exercise really helpful. You have two, but they're very similar. One's around questions to ask yourself to help yourself kind of get out of your strict thinking and identify novel ideas. And the other one is about moving from a limited mindset to a possibility mindset. And so I love leaving people with things that they can actually work on or journal. What are some questions that you have found really helpful to get you out of your stricter ways of thinking and open yourself up to new ways?
That's a great question. Part of what I have always done is ask myself the question, what would I do or what would I think if I knew that I couldn't fail? And then what would I do or think if I had unlimited resources? Because part of what happens with these stories and our brain's desire to keep us safe is we really end up in a place of scarcity. And we don't even know it necessarily, but we end up in this place of scarcity. And so part of what we're trying to do in this interrogation step is to open our minds to the abundance that really is all around us, but that we've kind of been conditioned to not see as a way to protect ourselves. And so asking these questions of what would I do or what would I think if I knew I couldn't fail, and what would I do or what would I think if I had unlimited resources, can tend to open us up to some possibilities that we may have never considered before. And you'll have to, as you're considering these questions, you'll have to be conscious of saying when the thought comes up, yeah, but that's not really possible, or yeah, but we know that's not really true. We don't have unlimited resources or whatever, to just say, yeah, but just for a moment, we're going to suspend disbelief. We can come back to that in a second. That's always a great way to kind of calm your brain down. Yeah, we can come back to that concern in a second. But for now, let's just suspend disbelief and just imagine, what would it be like? What would we think about? What would we do if we knew we couldn't fail, if we knew we had unlimited resources? And I think that would be a great prompt to sit with your journal and a nice cup of tea or coffee and think through.
I like to do that even on walks. I go through phases
Yes.
of like being in major information consumption mode,
Yep.
and then I can't listen to anything or read
Yep.
anything.
Yep.
Now I'm kind of trying to balance those. I'm actually, anything I listen to, I won't listen to more than I can, what I'm calling distilling. I've been reading a lot of books
Ah,
about note
I
taking.
like
So
that.
I have to look back at whatever notes that I take and then distill them and write certain things in my own words and take different amounts of
Hmm.
notes. And I'm just seeing what that opens up.
Yeah.
But part of that for me is doing it with my own thoughts. And so I like to go on walks and use like a transcriber, like Otter or something like that, and
Yes.
just sort of talk. And I've been trying to play around more with creativity and just get myself out of those thinking ideas and just think
Hmm.
like, what if I was going to invent something like, what do people need? What if I was going to invent
Yeah.
something that everyone else thinks is impossible? What's that? Or like ask myself some
Yes.
weird prompt and then just talk about it,
Yes. I
have it
love that.
transcribed, and then like
Yep.
go back and look. So I found this so helpful. Again, the book was incredible. It had
Thank you.
so much new information and just different ways of looking at things that instilled the information in a different
Mm.
way. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you, your company, your work,
Yeah.
and your book, where's the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So the best place is at mindyourmindsetbook.com/ love, mindyourmindsetbook.com/love. And this is going to tell you all about me, about my dad, who's my co-author on this book, and about the book itself. But also, one of the reasons you want to use that specific link that I gave is that we have some special bonuses when you buy the book. You can buy it anywhere. You can buy it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target or whatever. But then take your receipt and you can come to this website and get bonuses, including a course that we're just recording this week that's going to walk you through the book, that's going to take you through exercises and give you prompts, a self-coacher desk tool that you can print out and kind of walk yourself through this framework that we've introduced today. And then also the audiobook. So don't buy the audiobook because you're going to get that for free. Buy the Kindle or the paper edition of the book, and then make sure to take your receipt to mindyourmindsetbook.com/love and get all that great stuff for free.
All the links for this episode are at mindlove.com/294. Your challenge for this week is to get clear on your goals and start to break through those limiting beliefs and actually create a plan for accomplishing something. I don't care what it is, figure out one of your goals and make it a reality. And I have something awesome to share with you this week. This month's masterclass in the Mind Love membership is directly aligned with this episode. It's all about spiritual goal setting, uniting the cosmos with the concrete. So it's your guide to harmonizing all of the mystical aspects of the universe with practical actions and enabling you to manifest your goals effortlessly and joyfully, which is really the most important part. So it will help you connect with your higher purpose and align your goals with life's natural flow. So if you've had a hard time accomplishing goals, especially maybe since high school or college when you had a structure, this course is for you. It'll guide you through intention setting, transforming your plans into achievable tasks, and then sustaining your motivation through spiritual alignment. You will also learn how to stay open to divine guidance while taking these inspired actions, which will make sure that all of your progress is fueled by love, creation, and abundance. I'm really excited about this masterclass. It's something that I've had in my brain for years, and it's the direct steps that I follow when I'm accomplishing anything. So I'm excited to finally birth this into the world and share it with you. And the best part is when you sign up, you get access to all of the other masterclasses that we've released this year. You can sign up at mindlove.com/membership. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.